I love this image, the background here. I don't know if you can see it. It's basically a guy who's tugging at his time from all of these applications. And basically this represents the attention economy, what I call the attention economy. And the attention economy is basically, whether you're a meditation app or you're the New York Times or you're an addictive game or you're Facebook, you still fundamentally have to compete for people's attention. And the best way to get people's attention is to seduce their psychological instincts. I know this because I worked at a lab at Stanford called the Persuasive Technology Lab that basically taught students how to persuade people's psychological instincts so that you can get them to click on stuff, finish sign-up forms, keep scrolling. And my project partners in that class were the founders of Instagram. I always say that to sort of give that credibility. So there was this whole generation of people who, at the end of the day, if you want to be successful as a technology maker, as a civic app maker, or as a news website, you have to basically tap into what drives people's psychology to get them to do stuff. And that got me really concerned because once you have this power and you have a small group of people who are persuading a large group of people, what is the ethical responsibility or relationship that you have when you're persuading so many other people with what to do with their life? You're basically designing other people's lives. So that's some of what I want to talk about today, and I'd love to leave most questions, so I might go through this even kind of quickly. And I'm going to start by telling a story, which is that about 2 years ago, I actually helped host a meeting between Thich Nhat Hanh, if you know who that is. He is an international spokesperson for mindfulness and meditation. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1969 with by Martin Luther King, so that puts context in history. And he's sort of a Zen master meditator. And he came to Silicon Valley about 2 years ago because he was very concerned by what this is doing to people's brains. By what this is doing to people's attention. And he was coming to Google and a few other technology companies to give a talk about helping people know themselves. He thought that basically the people who make the technology need to understand themselves deeply and for them to be able to deeply design for other people. And the people who organized his talk knew about some of the work I was doing and said, look, if you can basically find the lead designers at Google, we'll give you an hour of his time. And so I ran as fast as I could, and I found the lead designers of like the main products. And there was this meeting between essentially 9 Buddhist monks, including Thich Nhat Hanh. Like imagine walking into a tech company conference room, and you have like 9 Buddhist monks on one side of the room. And then you have a bunch of people that look kind of like us or like me, young 20 to 35-year-old sort of designery people. And we talked for 2 hours about essentially human values and what does it really mean to design for the deepest human values. So this upgrades the kind of conversation that people might typically have in a tech company about just getting people to click or getting people to scroll or saying that we're going to make the world more open and connected. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, is that basically we're only as good as the representations that we speak in and that we live by and that we measure ourselves against. So that's the theme of what I want to talk to you about. So what is a representation? Well, how many of you are familiar with the phrase, the map is not the territory? Okay, some of you. So this comes from cybernetics and from semiotics. The idea is basically every map refers to some kind of underlying truth or reality. But if you use the top part of this map, that's a map of reality. But it both expresses truth and lies to you, because that's what every map does. Every map, and I mean this in a deeper metaphorical way, every map will express truth and lie to you, because you can never capture the underlying territory of truth with maps. So what are some examples of maps? I might use the term map or representation interchangeably. But a map might be a life philosophy. So someone might be saying, always say yes to opportunities, right? That's like that's referring to some kind of underlying set of desires that a person has that are not really articulated in that, but refer to it. Or a metric like gross domestic product refers to an idea of what improving human welfare might correspond to, but doesn't have the truth of human welfare represented by it. Or a design goal, let's help people book a flight. Or a mission statement, let's make the world more open and connected. Or an idea like choice. So choice is a map, and it refers to a kind of underlying desire or truth that we want, but it doesn't capture what really goes on in what we call choice. So I want to kind of bring this as the frame of the conversation because I think it'll help elucidate everything else. And for the first time in history, we have mostly like 50 people who eat at fancy restaurants in the Mission District of San Francisco, who go to work at three buses, three types of buses, and go to three tech companies to work, and they make choices about the design of the screens in our pockets, and it affects how 1 billion people live. So essentially, these guys and gals basically are defining the representations that everyone else lives by. So they're defining the choice, the frame, the design, the rules, the competition, the medium that then all these applications, services, websites, et cetera, compete within. And so we're only as good as the language that these guys use to think about and conceive of what designing for human values might actually look like. And I always like to say that they're kind of the inadvertent urban planners of this city of 1 billion people. So they sort of set, in their choices, they set the kind of distances of the widths of the sidewalks and whether or not you're connected to everybody or whether your text messages shows just the most important people or the most recent people. And all their little choices add up to kind of the zoning laws and the metaphorical parts of what makes this big city that we're all basically living in. Except, of course, it's designed by companies, not some kind of public commission. So what I want to do is talk about the way that a design goal, the way you represent something, could have consequences. So if your design goal, let's say you're building like a messaging application, and your goal is to help people send messages to each other instantly. So this is a great goal. I mean, in a world where people cannot send messages, what an amazing goal that people can send messages to each other instantly. So you can imagine a whole team of people who like go to work every day, and this is like the thing on their wall. This is what we want to do. But what might happen with that goal? Well, before answering that question, I want to basically replace the words good and bad in our vocabulary with 3 questions that you can ask of any representation, which is that if you represent this as your design goal, what kinds of activities or things in the world will that enhance or amplify? What will that suppress? And where will that be vulnerable to? So if you push that to its extreme, imagine a dial and you're just pushing that to the extreme, what's going to happen in a world where people are thinking this way, right? Well, so I'll give you an example, and I'm just stealing these slides from my TED Talk. So let's imagine 2 people. There's this woman, Nancy, on the left, and there's this guy, John, on the right. And John remembers, I need to ask Nancy for that document before I forget. Sorry for those of you over there. Hopefully you can maybe see. And so what does he do? He blows away her attention, just completely bulldozes her attention. And every single time he does that, there's a huge cost of about 23 minutes that it takes us to resume focus after an interruption. This is a woman named Gloria Mark, who is at UC Irvine, has been studying interruption science for the last 10 years. And her research shows the second thing is that the more external interruptions you get in an hour, if you look at the next hour of activity, people don't get any interruptions, but their self-interruption rate goes up. So what appears to be happening is that the more external interruptions we get, it sort of increases the internal clock rate of self-interruption. So in other words, there's a big cost to being interrupted all the time. So how would you fix this? Well, I'm going to first show you a design solution. Let's imagine that we give Nancy like a traffic lane that says that she wants to be focused. Maybe this occurs because whenever she goes into doing whatever is work for her, it automatically invites her, says, do you want to be focused for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours? You say, I want to be focused for 2 hours. And then it tells John when he wants to send the message, he still has to get that message off of his mind, right, and hit send. Except John now knows that the messages are being held and will be delivered to Nancy as soon as she's unfocused. So there's clear communication. Nancy knows that John knows that Nancy knows, right? It's sort of the full loop is established. And now you might be thinking now, hold on a second, I would never trust this because I'd be worried, what if I'm missing something important? And that's solved too. John still has a way of escalating a message and saying, I still would like to interrupt you, but I'm going to now make that a conscious choice. So think of it as for this period of 2 hours when Nancy wants to go focus, we're flipping the world upside down. And now if I want to interrupt, I can only do it consciously as opposed to accidentally. So I didn't sort of show you how I got to this solution, but effectively what this is kind of like a traffic light in this billion city, place that these designers are building, right? It's like a traffic light that's coordinating and synchronizing underlying needs of people. And the thing I want to tell you is that we got there by asking a different question. If your design goal is to help people send messages instantly, then when people are interrupting each other, there's nothing wrong with that, right? If your North Star, if your mission statement is we're going to help people send messages instantly, then when people get interrupted all the time, there's nothing that's triggering there's a problem here. And so if you upgrade the goal to the human values, the Thich Nhat Hanh question of what does it mean for two people to understand each other, respect each other, coordinate with each other's needs. He joked in our meeting, by the way, that instead of a spell check, what if you had a compassion check? And so when you're writing an email and you accidentally would write something in a way that you wouldn't perceive as abrasive, it would tell the other person, it would let you know, like maybe in yellow, do you want to change that? So again, you get to those kinds of solutions if you're actually thinking deeply, if you're representing the North Star of the good in a deeper way and asking deeper questions. So that's what I want to talk to you about. So here's another one. Number of shares is popularity. So the news feed right now represents popularity as the things that get shared the most are the things that should have the most attention. But this is another representation, right? So in a world where this is true, meaning, let's actually even get more specific. So what is a share? Well, a share is when someone clicks the share button on a news website, right? The share button. So if news websites and everyone who's competing for attention and competing for popularity knows that sharing is the best way to get attention, what are they going to do? Well, they're going to put the share buttons at the top of the piece instead of at the bottom. And they're going to write their headline in a way or put something visual or expressive at the top so that it gets shared instantly without people reading it. And that's actually, in fact, exactly what happens. So Chartbeat, a company local to New York, found that sharing behavior is not correlated with reading time, meaning that people are just as likely to share an article before reading it than after reading it. Okay? So imagine that there's some designers working at Facebook, and they don't make that distinction. They don't make a distinction between shares that happen after someone read an article and the shares that someone made before they read an article. Then their representation of popularity is impoverished. Does that make sense? So we're only as good as the way that we represent and think deeply about what sharing is for, what popularity is for. Another example, Hitmonk, funny example. Hitmonk, the travel website, says booking a flight may not just be about price, but might be about the human experience of travel, right? Someone's making a life choice about where they want to go, and the prices are super important. You want to put them there, but you may not want to rank the prices just by the cheapest to the most expensive. You might want to rank it by the whole total weighted experience of travel for that human being as they're making that life choice. Or another example, if you're booking a room, how many of you use like Google Calendar to like book, rooms in your companies? And so there's this like room selector thing, right? So this is putting people, this is an example where the designers of calendar and all calendars are kind of putting people into a representation. They're putting you into a frame that causes you to think about your time and what meeting another person is about. Specifically, it kind of puts you in the frame of, time is about 30-minute slices that I can dice up and sort of throw around on a grid. That's kind of the representation that like we don't even think about because we're in it, but that's a specific representation. And the question might be, what's the most empowering representation to people when they're making a choice about spending time together? So imagine instead of a room selector, it was trying to help you ask the question, what's the most fulfilling way for two people who want to meet to catch up with each other? And you can imagine putting dinners or walking meetings or lunches or other, there's lots of other ways that people can sort of be together that we don't think about when we're in the moment of choice. Or example might be, part of this is that software would need to know what your values are to create choice architectures that align with what you want. So let's just say that you valued exercise. Then you can imagine that the thing might say, well, here's the different subway directions for where you want to go. But also, if you said you care about, walking, and getting more exercise, you could also put walking on the menu so you can make a comparison in that menu. Because when we're all running and rushing from thing to thing, we're only as good as kind of the menu that's presented to us. Or by contrast, just to make this clear, it's not a paternalistic thing. If you value productivity, you can imagine software that says, oh, like here's that podcast you wanted to finish. Here's that phone call you wanted to make. So every choice is sort of complicated and nuanced, and we can help people make choices one way or another. I'm suggesting these not as the solution, but more as an example of how to think about deep representations when you're trying to empower people to live their lives. So really, I think of wisdom as basically upgrading from simple representations to deeper representations. So for example, a person who lives their life by, and I had this once when I was like 22 years old, always say yes. Like when opportunities come your way, just start saying yes to things, right? There's like an appeal to that when you're like 22 and you think that's a good way to live life. But that's sort of, what does that amplify? Can you imagine what would that amplify for a person? What would that suppress? What kinds of things would they not be doing or seeing? And then what would that be vulnerable to and pushed to the extreme? And there's sort of an upgrade you can make to a sort of different kind of discernment but openness. Or we have a lot of times in our culture a kind of philosophy of freedom, just maximizing the number of choices. More choice, more choice, more choice. This is a great goal when people don't have choice. But there might be a different, wiser goal of a minimal set of empowering choices that cause people to not have to think deeply about comparing a million options that don't matter to them, but the minimal set of outcome-oriented choices that actually get people where they want to go. Or instant navigation. Let's get people there fast, fast, fast. To instead say empowered navigation. How in control do you feel? Do you actually get to where you want to go? This occurs a lot, I think, in browsers, like or mobile phone home screens, where navigation is the metaphor, and we can get you there instantly. But we're not caring about are you getting to where you want to go and staying where you want to go for exactly how much time you'd like to spend. Or sex, you're looking for sex, but then what you really want is good sex or a deep partner, right? Or sustainable business. A friend of mine runs Seventh Generation, which is a home cleaning supplies company. He was one of the founders, and he got disenchanted with green sustainable business, devolving into less bad business, meaning it's sustainable, it's green, but it's still wasteful. It's still harming the environment. It's just harming the environment a little bit less than other business. And he said that's a great goal in a world that doesn't have sustainable business, but let's create a new initiative called net positive business, which is something he's working on now, where you have a restorative or regenerative effect on business. And you can imagine, would you want a sustainable marriage or would you want a regenerative or restorative marriage, right? Would you want technology that is like less distracting, or do you want technology that actually net positive puts you towards the life that you want to live? So one of my favorite last examples to illustrate this is couch surfing. So if couch surfing was measuring its success in sort of a obvious, immediate, intuitive way, you might think that their design goal, their representation of success, is let's match guests to hosts. So people who are looking for a place to stay find a place to stay. But they said that's not our goal. Our goal is a deeper human Thich Nhat Hanh value, which is we want to create lasting positive experiences between people who've never met. And the amazing thing is they came up with a way to measure it. I'll just quickly describe how it works. So let's say you're meeting with someone, you're staying with someone on couch surfing in Paris. Do you guys know what couch surfing is? Okay, it's like Airbnb. But before Airbnb, it was way bigger than Airbnb until a year ago. But it's free, and so you can just stay with people based on a reputation economy. So let's say I'm staying in Paris for 4 days. So what they do is they take the 4 days that people spent together. Those are their success metrics. So they say, I'm going to Paris for 4 days, staying with someone for 4 days, and then they estimate how many hours would be in those 4 days. So how many hours would have occurred between two people in 4 days. And then they ask both people, how positive were those hours? So they're trying to get a concrete count of positive hours that you spent together. What's the positivity of the hours that you spent? And then what they do is they subtract all of the time that people spent on the website, because that's a cost. That's all negative hours from their perspective. Because what they care about is the net positive new hours in people's lives. What they call it is net orchestrated conviviality, or just really the net good times that people spent together that literally in a world without couch surfing wouldn't have happened. Can you see the distinction here? The representation that they're using for success is just much deeper, and they're caring about you actually getting closer to the life that you want to live, or having some kind of fulfilling experience that's doing something for you. So could you imagine if there was a whole world that actually worked that way, right? Where every technology that you used actually was built on this kind of principle, that it's trying to move you towards the life that you want to live. It's not just less distracting or notifies you less. It's that it actually measures its success in you getting what you came for, which raises lots of other questions. Do people know what they want, et cetera, et cetera? But what I want to say is there's obviously conflicts of interest here, because the entire internet economy right now is measured in time spent. The way we measure success is we maximize time spent. I have to prove to my friends and to my private investors and my people I'm trying to impress at cocktail parties, that I have an app that's getting lots of usage. I have lots of active users. I've got 1 billion swipes a day on Tinder. That's literally how they measure success. So we'd have to change how we value success. And that's kind of what I've been working on with some collaborators, because we've done this in other industries with organic, where we said, if you want to do the thing that's good for people and you want to design what you're doing in a different way that's really about people and human values, then you need to be rewarded for it. Because if you're a farmer and some other farmers around you start putting chemicals on their products that are going to harm people, but they won't know for a long time, so they're just going to keep doing it, and it lowers the cost of that apple that they're making, then if you're the farmer who doesn't want to do that, you'll get punished by the market because you'll literally get priced out, you'll die. Until we give that farmer a seal that says this is something that's actually built for people and people can make a different choice. So we did that with organic. We also did it with LEED certification. And we could do it with technology. And how might that work? Well, doing that would account, first of all, for moving from a time-spent economy to a time well-spent economy. So imagine a whole services industry where people are measuring their success in helping you spend your time well according to you. Just to get that clear, there's no normative view here. How might that work? Well, imagine that part of this, I guess here's some distinctions. So in a time spent world, here's sort of a set of distinctions that might be helpful. In a time spent world, this is like what apps and websites sort of have as their current way of operating. So the stance is, it's your responsibility to get the most out of me. If I'm Facebook or Twitter or email, it's like, I'm just presenting your stuff. It's up to you to get the most out of me, right? The design goal is help people do stuff and complete tasks. The framing effects are disempowering choices that basically align with what businesses care about. So it's about getting you to click and spend as much time. So all the choice architectures are defined to fulfill the business's goals. The measurement of success is all about transactions. So clicks, shares, time spent, right? And people don't feel in control. The whole design is to make you feel not self-aware of what's going on while you're using a product. And there's lots of compulsive checking that and external, sort of, I call them psychological externalities, that are essentially the user's responsibility. If you don't want to be anxious using my product, that's your responsibility to go meditate and quiet your mind, right? Versus, how would a time well spent world work? Well, the stance would be, it's my responsibility to help you get the most out of it. I don't know about you, but I've had teachers in my life that you could tell when they show up and gave a lecture, they cared about you getting the most out of it. Versus I'm just doing my thing and it's up to you to study, right? And it feels nice when someone's caring about you. And the design goal is to help people spend time well, meaning my design goal is to help you spend time in your life according to what you care about. And my framing, the mediums and representations I'm creating, the choice architectures I'm creating are empowering and relate to what you care about. And I rate and measure my success in terms of net positive contributions to your life. And I'm aiming to help you make conscious choices where you're in control and self-aware. And I'm aiming to minimize the number of externalities psychologically and compulsive checking and addictions that people normally try to create. So these are some distinctions. There's more on my website. You can imagine there being a rating where you actually show people a reflection of their browsing behavior, and you basically ask them, here's all the articles that you read. Which of these were time well spent? Or is there any percentage of this, or some feeling about this that just didn't feel like it's what you wanted? And imagine if that score got built into Facebook reporting for websites, so that your newsfeed score was impacted by your time well spent score. So imagine stock price is affected by time well spent. Imagine in Google Analytics, publishers can basically know that some people don't feel like their time is well spent on that website, and that creates a feedback loop where they have to improve it. So that's kind of what I wanted to give to you today. And again, we're only as good as the representations that we use in language, ideas, design. And for each representation, we can always ask, what will that enhance? What will that suppress? And what will that be vulnerable to when pushed to the extreme? So that's what I wanted to leave you with. Sorry about that.